CatSynth TV. Hey everybody, CatSynth TV, and we're exploring the Jup-8 V4 from Arturia. It's their newly redesigned reimagination of the Roland Jupiter 8. But before we begin, please do subscribe to this channel for more synthesizer content coming out regularly. And please do consider supporting our demos via Patreon or Ko-Fi. Links in the description below. Roland released their flagship Jupiter 8 synthesizer in 1981. It was a beast. An 8-voice polyphonic analog synthesizer with 2 VCOs, multiple filters, as well as a unique cross-modulation between oscillators and other voice-shaping features. It also had memory to store patches like the Prophet 5 and a versatile arpeggiator. What it didn't have was MIDI. Nonetheless, it was the biggest and fattest of Roland's polyphonic analog synthesizers. It was prized by many well-known artists in the 1980s, and originals command high prices. The new Arturia Jup-8 V4 reimagines the Jupiter 8 with a visual style reminiscent of the original, as well as the sound, architecture, and features. There are 2 VCOs, an LFO and 2 envelopes for modulation, a high-pass and resonant low-pass filter, a VCA section. There are global controls for voice mode, dispersion, which we'll explain later, and the arpeggiator. The interface reproduces the button and panel style of the original, although not as colorfully as version 3 of the Jup-8 V. Fortunately, they are separate instruments, so anyone who upgrades from the previous version of Arturia's V collection will be able to enjoy both. Let's bring up the default preset and take a closer look at the voice features. There are 2 VCOs per voice, which can be mixed together. Let's solo out VCO 1 and take a closer look. There are 4 different wave shapes. In addition to the sawtooth, there is a triangle, a square wave, and a pulse rectangle. This waveform can also use pulse width modulation. In addition to manually controlling the pulse width, we can control it with the LFO or envelope 1. Let's try the envelope. Adjust the envelope points a bit. And now let's try the LFO. It works best with the sine wave, less so with the other shapes. We can adjust the octave of VCO1. Note that the controls refer to feet, like organ stops, rather than octaves. Now let's bring back VCO2. VCO2 is a fine-tune control as well as semitone tuning. It also has 4 wave shapes, but a sine instead of a triangle, and noise instead of a square. Let's set both wave shapes to sawtooth. When slightly detuned, we get a chorus or ultrasaw sound. This also works well with VCO2 as a sub-oscillator. There is also a sync function that restarts one oscillator's duty cycle based on the other. Either can be used as a source, but I recommend using VCO2 to sync VCO1. You can get some pretty classic analog sounds using the envelope with sync. We now look at one of the most powerful and one of the most dangerous features, the cross modulation. This allows VCO2 to modulate the frequency of VCO1. This is the analog version of FM synthesis. Changing the tuning of VCO2 has a dramatic effect on the sound. We now switch back to the sawtooth on both VCOs and look at the high-pass filter. And now the resonant low-pass filter. It has both 2-pole 12 dB and 4-pole 24 dB modes. We can use the LFO to modulate the VCF. We can also use envelope 1. Setting the sustain level low and the decay to a short value yields a classic analog synth bass sound. The keyboard follow determines how much of the cutoff frequency changes with the pitch. When the follow level is lower, lower pitches have a brighter filter response. Increasing the keyboard follow makes the lower pitches duller, but the higher pitches brighter. It really depends on the type of sound you're going for. For a fat resonant bass, lower the keyboard follow. The VCA controls the volume of the sound. We can use envelope 2 to control the VCA. Let's bring up the release a bit. You can hear envelope 1 on the filter cutting out sooner as it has a lower release value. Okay, let's turn back on sync and save this as a preset for later. Let's make a few more changes, and now we can look at the global preset settings. The voice assign allows us to switch between solo, unison, and polyphonic modes. Solo is just a single voice. Okay, let's switch back to polyphonic. There are 2 poly modes that have different behavior when releasing notes. And then there is unison mode, where we can stack several oscillators on a single note. There are multiple unison modes for the number of oscillators to stack, as well as a classic mode. We're in classic mode right now. Let's try 5 voices, or 10 oscillators on a single note. Unison detune shifts the tuning of each oscillator, giving us an even fatter sound. Using the sawtooth wave shapes, this gives us a real supersaw. Okay, let's go back to poly mode. Pan spread will pan the oscillators left and right, widening the sound in the stereo field. And of course, there's a portamento function. We now look at the arpeggiator. It has several modes for playing back the notes. We can use the hold function to keep the arpeggiator playing even after I release the keys. Next, let's look at voice dispersion. This is a unique function of the Jup-8 V, where a set of parameters listed in this panel can randomly drift, much like the original Jupiter 8. There are 3 fixed dispersion presets, but we can also set custom values for the dispersion. It's a rather subtle effect at times. Okay, let's go back to our save preset and take a look at the pitch bend and mod wheels. The pitch bend allows independent control of VCO1 and VCO2. With the sync on, bending VCO1 bends the pitch like normal. But if we switch the bend only to VCO2, we change the sync behavior for some interesting timbre effects. We can also use the pitch bend to control the VCF frequency, giving us a real-time filter control. We see similar flexibility with the mod wheel, where we can control the amount of LFO applied to the VCO frequency or the VCF frequency. Let's try some different LFO shapes. Like all of Arturia's V collection synths, the Jup-8 V has an advanced panel with functionality not found in the original. Here we have a modulation pane with 2 additional LFOs, a step sequencer, routing of keyboard modulation sources, and an effects section. Let's go back to the modulation pane. Each of the LFOs has several shapes as well as additional parameters for adjusting the phase and warp, which further modifies the LFO shape. We can also use them to control a wider set of parameters such as the VCO cross modulation. The modulation mixer allows us to combine any pair of modulation sources with an additional operation. Let's divide LFO 2 by LFO 3. We can then use this complex wave to control the cross modulation. The LFOs and modulation mixer can control multiple parameters. Let's also have the mixer control VCF cutoff. Now a cool trick here is to have separate pulse width modulation for VCO1 and VCO2 with each of the LFOs. Okay, now let's look at the keyboard modulation pane. We can adjust the curve of the mod wheel and control the high-pass filter, which cannot be modulated from the main view. Let's set Aftertouch to control cross modulation. Now that was fun. Next, let's take a look at the step sequencer. There are 2 sequencers for notes and modulation, each with up to 32 steps. Let's program the note sequencer, set it to 23 steps, Now let's look at the modulation sequencer. Set it to 27 steps and target VCF cutoff. Okay, let's go back to the modulation pane and use the modulation mixer to control the VCF resonance. Let's shut off the note sequencer but leave the modulation sequencer on. Okay, now let's look at the effects section. We can add up to 3 effects, either in parallel or series. Right now we have the slot set up in series. Let's first add a bit crusher. Of course, the effects parameters can be modulation destinations. Let's add bit crusher depth to the modulation mixer. Okay, let's add delay to the second effects slot. And a compressor in the third slot. In this final segment of the video, we look at some of the factory presets. We hope you've enjoyed this look at the Jup-8 V4. To find out more, please visit Arturia.com and check out the description below this video. Thanks for watching. Check out more at www.catsynth.com and please subscribe to CatSynth TV.